Good afternoon. Welcome to this week's Team Kentucky Update. I'm Andy. We have a number of updates from this week. A lot of them come from yesterday, which was a big day. Yesterday afternoon in Covington, I joined the President, Senator McConnell, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, and other national, state, and local leaders to highlight the largest federal infrastructure funding award in U.S. history. 1 week ago today, we first learned about it, that the Brent Spence Corridor Project had secured more than $1.6 billion in federal grants. This is a green light and a game changer. It impacts our entire country, and it's going to help us complete this project and to do it without tolls. This isn't just the fulfillment of my administration's promise. It's the beginning of an even brighter future for the families in this region, for the tens of thousands of travelers that cross that bridge every day. 3% of the country's GDP crosses the Brent Spence Bridge every day. And it's going to help those that are even just passing by, and for the many businesses that rely on this key commercial link. The need could not be greater. The current span, while structurally sound, is carrying twice the number of vehicles each day that it was designed to accommodate. The project is also going to create thousands of construction jobs in northern Kentucky in the build-out phase. Families will be impacted for the better, knowing how they're going to provide for their families and to give their kids maybe more opportunities than they had. It's not just going to change a region. It's going to change the lives of thousands of Kentucky and Ohio families. This project has been talked about for years, really decades, but we're the group that's getting it done. I want to thank the President for delivering this historic funding request. I want to thank Leader Mitch McConnell for his hard work and for voting for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. I want to thank Congressman Yarmouth for shepherding it through the House, Covington Mayor Joe Meyer, and I want to thank the General Assembly, who honored a request that we made to go ahead and budget significant dollars towards this project so that we could make our application, which was successful, the best it could be. And look what happens when we all work together. We secured the largest infrastructure grant in U.S. history. Again, we did this as a team, Democrats and Republicans, from the White House down to local government. When we stop worrying about right or left, and we just move forward and we do it together, there's nothing that we cannot do. Last night, I also shared my State of the Commonwealth address and how, despite everything we've been through, tornadoes, flooding, ice storms, a polar plunge, inflation, and even a war in Europe, our Commonwealth is still strong and our future is really bright. I discussed just how tough Kentuckians are, and we celebrated our first responders. We discussed the progress we've made in eastern and western Kentucky, where they were impacted by deadly natural disasters. And we talked about the 2 amazing years of economic growth and prosperity that we've just experienced. With 2022 closed, we're also celebrating the best 2 years for economic growth in our state's history. That's something, regardless of party, we all ought to be pretty thrilled about. During my administration, we have now announced more than 800 private sector new location and expansion projects, totaling $24 billion in investments, and the best part, the creation of 42,600 full-time jobs. I also had an opportunity to talk about how this administration has now set the record for the lowest unemployment rate 3 separate times, as well as the longest period of unemployment below 3.9%. Even with that, we talked about ways that we can boost our workforce by lifting up our people and not kicking them while they're down. We're expected to post the 4 highest years of state budget surpluses in Kentucky's history. We've had the largest rainy day fund ever and the highest annual growth rate in 2022 that we've had in 31 years. We're able to do all of this while increasing efforts to improve public safety and to push forward major infrastructure projects, everything from the I-69 corridor to the Mountain Parkway expansion, where every part is now either under construction or design, all the way to Prestonsburg, to the Brent Spence Bridge. And together, along with the General Assembly, we came to agreements about how to help Kentucky families with infrastructure so important to them: clean, drinkable water, as well as expanded high-speed internet. And 2022 also saw amazing gains in access to health care, including breaking ground on the first hospital in the west end of Louisville in 150 years. 2023 provides us a special opportunity, and I hope one that is seen by this legislature. It's a chance to change everything for the better, because by working together, I think we can be the generation that ushers in new prosperity. Now, I know sometimes when people get to Frankfort, they think it's some battle between two teams. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be about helping our families. It's supposed to be about delivering on a better life. To do that, we've got to continue to work and to work hard. We've got to make investments, and those investments we laid out in bills that were filed by my state representative, Derek Graham, that should serve as a roadmap to where we need to go. One of these bills includes the Education First Plan, which will include a 5% pay raise for every public school educator. We have a teacher shortage of over 11,000. That means kids all over Kentucky are impacted by not having a teacher in the classroom, or sometimes having year-long subs. That is not okay. And every single parent across the Commonwealth ought to want us to do something about it. The small pay raises that were ultimately provided by school districts across Kentucky averaged 3% last year. And even with that 3% raise, we fell in our competitiveness in attracting teachers. We're now 44th in the country in teacher pay. Our teachers are looking at other bordering states that they can go to, or other jobs, because these are good, important jobs. And we ought to compensate our educators like the way we value those jobs. We also push for universal pre-K to help our kids see academic success, and it's the number one thing we can do to boost our workforce and to do it quickly. I also called on the General Assembly to finally legalize medical cannabis. It is what the people of the Commonwealth overwhelmingly want. We got a lot of people out there who are suffering, that this can help them get away from prescription after prescription after prescription of addictive pain pills. After years of inaction, I issued the executive order that just took effect that tries to give people access to effective pain relief without fear of a misdemeanor. But I'm the first person that will tell you that while we're trying just as hard as we can with that executive order, it is imperfect. But every imperfection it has is because the General Assembly has not passed a bill legalizing medical cannabis. We're also filing legislation to legalize sports betting, a thing Kentuckians overwhelmingly want, and that should be enough. The people are who we represent. Legislation also supports our state workforce, providing an additional raise, a 1.5% COLA increase for retirees, and two payments of $100 million, one to shore up the state employee retirement system, and another $100 million to pay down the unfunded liability of the teachers' retirement system. This, I think, is an important moment for us as a Commonwealth, one where we can stop our kids moving from Kentucky and instead having people move to Kentucky, where no matter how big our kids dream, they can chase it right here in the Commonwealth. Now, in many ways, we're on top, but it takes work to stay there. It takes investment, and every investment we're talking about is one that's good for our families, not right, not left, not blue, not red, not D, not R, but just good for our families. Yesterday, I also got to share some good news regarding the Appalachian Regional Commission, or the ARC. I was very proud to announce yesterday I was unanimously chosen by my fellow Appalachian governors to serve as the co-chair of the ARC for 2023. For those who don't know, the ARC is a crucially important federal economic development agency. The ARC works alongside the 13 Appalachian states to fund projects that improve the lives of all of America's Appalachian citizens. The funding ARC provides is transformative. In 2022, Kentucky received more than $51 million from the ARC to move forward projects in our Appalachian region. In Pikeville, we announced ARC funding that's going to help train nursing students at the Pikeville Medical Center. This will provide Kentuckians with hands-on learning and career opportunities while improving healthcare access. In Perry County, we announced ARC funds to help build a new water treatment plant that'll provide clean and reliable water to over 1,000 Kentuckians. That's a lot of good news coming from the ARC. And our Appalachian Kentuckians deserve good news. And those are just the projects here in Kentucky. The ARC invested almost $240 million throughout the entire Appalachian region in 2022. Our Appalachian region of Kentucky has been left out for far too long. This gives me the opportunity to ensure it's included, that Eastern Kentucky is prioritized, and that we bring just as much potential and prosperity to Eastern Kentucky as we do to the entire rest of the state. As the state's co-chair, I'll work alongside federal co-chair Gail Manchin to help bring economic prosperity to Appalachian Kentucky, but really the entire region. So I want to thank my fellow governors, both Democrats and Republican, who voted for me to assume this role and had confidence that we could do it and do it for everyone. I look forward to working with each of them to make even more progress in this important region. I want to talk a little bit about weather, both what we have had recently, as well as give an update on flooding and our rebuilding efforts. Kentucky Emergency Management has been working across the Commonwealth and coordinating efforts after the Arctic storm, the events that followed the heavy rainfall too over the last couple of days that led to some localized flooding. As a result of the Arctic weather, 4 Kentuckians lost their lives, and that number could change. Yesterday, Ohio County declared a state of emergency as a result of the flooding that occurred on January 3rd. This was a county-level declaration. Certainly, our state of emergency for the polar plunge, the Arctic weather that we got is still in effect, which means we can provide help to counties that have been impacted, especially by pipe bursts. I want to thank all of our incredible local emergency management teams and our first responders. And I'm proud that all survivors sheltering in travel trailers through the Commonwealth Sheltering Program have now moved back into their units, and they've been restored to pre-storm condition. The travel trailers held up pretty well, even against the coldest weather certainly I can ever remember. We had a few issues with water lines. Many of those we could fix. And then we just had one campsite that out of an abundance of caution, we moved people out of and to Buckhorn. That was because of the bathhouse had lost its heat. And that's the fail-safe in each of these if there is an issue with any individual travel trailer. All right, as an update on the Eastern Kentucky flooding, so far the total approved amount from FEMA is more than $94 million. It's up $600,000 from last week. So my message to everyone is keep pushing, keep pursuing your claim. Dollars are still being paid out. We now have 266 travel trailers occupied. 689 people are being sheltered in them. That's up 8 from last week. We've had 107 total households transition out. That's an increase of 5 since December 29th. Remember, that's the best number up there because that means that family has found more stable housing. Kentucky State Parks are still sheltering 53 people, but that's down from 360 on September 1st. And the Transportation Cabinet continues to make progress on restoring the bridges that were damaged or demolished during flooding. To date, 25 bridges have been replaced and 13 others have been repaired. In addition, engineers have constructed 42 temporary crossings on public routes to keep them open while work proceeds on new bridges. The Team Eastern Kentucky Flood Relief Fund a little over $13 million. It's paid for every funeral of a Kentuckian that we lost during the flooding. And it sent out over $3.9 million in $500 checks to those that were approved for any amount of FEMA assistance. It's also committed $800,000 for building new homes and home repair, and this is in advance of what we're going to do on that site and not counting. These are projects that are already underway. Donations are still needed. This is going to be one of the toughest, if not the toughest, rebuild efforts after a natural disaster that the country has ever seen. We're trying to move people out of the floodplain and out of danger to higher ground, and that's going to have some real expenses. So please, folks, these donations that come in now are going to pair with groups like Habitat for Humanity and others to have a safe, clean, dry home out of the floodplain for these families that lost everything. Influenza activity, it remains at increased levels in Kentucky. Now at least 8 children have passed away from the flu already this season. Flu vaccination is the best way to prevent serious disease. The main strain of flu that's going around right now, the flu vaccine is very effective against. It is not too late to get vaccinated. Go get that flu shot. If you haven't, the flu is pretty rough this year. And even if you are in great health, you probably don't want to spend those couple of days really sick. Locations and appointments for flu shots can be found on vaccines.gov. In good news, RSV activity does appear to be declining. It continues to be declining. And the COVID-19 news is a little mixed and a little uncertain. So first, it does appear that activity is increasing nationwide, but fortunately, we are not seeing significant increases in cases or hospitalizations in Kentucky, though new data will come out, I think tonight, if not tomorrow. And so we're monitoring trends very closely. Let's put up the map. Several counties now have high COVID-19 community levels, but this map is better than it was a week ago, and that's pretty good news. Post Thanksgiving, and we'll see post Christmas and New Year. Now there is in this week's data. Why don't you show the case bar graph? There were especially in Louisville, cases that had been included in the week before and had been labeled as in Kentucky were actually in Indiana. And so don't look at 2 weeks ago to this week in that bar graph and think we had that big of a decrease. So the 2 weeks ago should have been shorter, and this week should be a little bit taller. But cases still week to week. We think if the data had been put in as Indiana residents in the beginning, it would still look down from 2 weeks ago. The biggest thing that we are watching is the new variant that is very quickly becoming the dominant variant in the United States. It is called XBB.1.5 Omicron subvariant. That's a mouthful. We don't know a lot about it other than it is even more contagious than the last Omicron variant, which means it's one of the most contagious viruses in the history of planet Earth, or at least in our lifetime. We don't know yet whether it will cause more or less serious disease, if it'll be the same, rougher or milder. Let's all pray that it's milder. So it's important that folks who have not gotten their newest booster to go get it. This new booster provides protection against Omicron and has provided good protection against all of the Omicron variants. Does it mean that it will shield you from getting COVID? Not always, but it certainly makes, if you get it, any health impacts much, much, much less severe. Unfortunately, data from the CDC indicates that less than 12% of Kentuckians 5 years or older have received that booster. So please schedule it. You can schedule it for a Friday if you're worried about how you'll feel that next day. But with some of this uncertainty on what this new variant will be, now is a good time to get that booster. All right. And finally, today's Team Kentucky All-Star. Today's Team Kentucky All-Star is Mike Berry, Secretary of the Tourism, Arts, and Heritage Cabinet. Secretary Berry's commitment to promoting our Commonwealth's greatest asset is unparalleled. Along with tourism partners across the state, Secretary Berry has helped this crucial industry rebound from the pandemic, driving new travelers to our great Commonwealth. He's also been there for Kentuckians in need. Following the devastating tornadoes in the west and historic flooding in the east, Secretary Berry was the one at the top coordinating emergency response efforts and sheltering in our state parks. I remember when the CEO of the Red Cross said it was one of the most innovative, but also most effective responses that she had seen to a disaster, and they had never seen a state use their state parks in this way. During the pandemic, Secretary Berry mobilized cabinet resources to prevent the spread of COVID-19, offering temporary housing in those parks to first responders and frontline healthcare workers. And there was a time where we believed we were going to have so many sick people that we had plans on how to treat and help them at our state parks as well. Under his leadership, the Commonwealth's invested more than $88 million in the tourism industry and $1.7 million towards the recovery of the arts industry. Sadly, Secretary Berry is going to retire in February. We're sad to see him go, but we want to congratulate him on his next chapter. And today, I'm proud to recognize him for his dedicated service and his many accomplishments. Thank you, Secretary Berry. We appreciate your commitment. Why don't you come off for a few words? We're going to miss you. Thank you for your great work.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Governor. It has been an honor and a pleasure serving on Team Kentucky as the Secretary of Tourism, Arts, and Heritage Cabinet, and to be named the Team Kentucky All-Star today. Thank you for that surprise. Over the course of the past 3 years, on days when fate forced us to rethink how we served not only the citizens of the Commonwealth, but also our guests, all I had to do was to listen to the passion and the caring shown by this governor, and it made any challenges that we face seem like opportunities. Governor Beshear, your continued support and investments in Kentucky's tourism and creative industries have been inspiring, and I thank you for building a better Kentucky for everyone and leading us by your faith-filled example. I'm thankful to have worked with the devoted staff of the Tourism, Arts, and Heritage Cabinet and our valued partners in both the tourism industry and all the attractions throughout Kentucky. From working tirelessly to assist those families impacted by the pandemic, tornadoes, and flooding, to promoting Kentucky as a diverse, welcoming destination, it's been rewarding to lead such a committed team. I would also be remiss if I didn't thank my family, especially my spouse, Bill, for understanding when I flunked retirement after only 10 weeks and joined the Beshear administration. To Samantha, Hayden, Reagan, Luke, Simon, my grandkids, yes, we're going to get a puppy now. But I will always be a very proud member of Team Kentucky. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Taking over at the helm of the Tourism, Arts, and Heritage Cabinet will be Lindy Casebeer. Lindy has been Deputy Secretary for the Kentucky Personnel Cabinet after many years of public service as a school educator, an administrator, a legislator, and a nonprofit director. He's also had senior roles within the Kentucky Tourism, Arts, and Heritage Cabinet for about 18 years under a number of different governors. The experience that Lindy brings with him means we will not lose a step. There are big shoes to fill, but I know he is ready for it. All right, we got a lot of journalists today. So we'll get to everybody. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I think we have 6 that are here with us, as well as 3 on virtually. So we'll start with Anna.
Thank you, Governor. Talking about the legislation that is up for vote this session about legalization of medical cannabis, let's see. House Speaker Osborne is quoted as saying, "We passed it out of the House twice. I think we've shown that we will pass it. The Senate has not yet shown that." Have there been talks that you've been party to with Senate leadership with legislators on that side of the thing saying, hey, can we work together on this? You know, the House has definitely shown they're interested, multiple pieces of legislation there, you know, relating to it. You know, how are things looking on that front, or is it still too early to say?
Well, first, I want to commend the House because they did pass medical cannabis, I think twice, out of their chamber, and they should be commended for it. And I think what you saw yesterday when I talked about it is you had people from both parties standing up, that this crosses the aisle, not just with voters, with our citizens, with those that are in need, but also with our legislators. Sadly, it's just a couple people in leadership that are keeping it from happening. This is the will of the people. I mean, 80 to 90% of Kentuckians are for this. What other issue can you find that has that type of widespread support? This session, which is only a couple days old, I haven't had direct talks with Senate leadership yet about it. Certainly in past sessions, we had a number of talks, especially with bill sponsors, about different things because, listen, the legislature will pass something, but then the executive branch has to carry it out. And we want to be able to do that effectively and have the best system that we can. There's a bill being filed, I believe, today by Representative Derek Graham that has our plan that is very similar to one that was filed by a different representative last session, but is actually even more streamlined to help us get the job done. You know, it's time, and actually we're continuing to also have talks where we can with other states about how we can make the executive order more effective with other states to help people get the relief that they need. McKenna.
Thank you. Yesterday on the Senate floor, Senator John Sickle said that he sent a letter to you regarding juvenile justice. And he also referenced a situation in northern Kentucky where a 17-year-old was taken into custody and then transported to Floyd County. I was wondering if you reviewed that letter, what was your response to it, and if you can speak about plans for transportation.
I have read the letter. Listen, we have to make major changes in our juvenile justice system and in our facilities, and we need to do it quickly. That means it's going to take some time for us to get every piece in place that will eventually address, I think, all of the concerns of Senator Schickel. When we announced our moves that we're going to create a female-only juvenile justice detention center, and then when we were going to create centers based on seriousness of the crime, we talked about the fact that there were going to be some transportation issues. We also talked about how we're going to form a transportation unit inside DJJ to take that burden off local law enforcement. How it's going to work, again, we announced this several weeks ago, is we're going to have a separate part of a facility for juveniles that when they are first arrested, there's about a 48-hour period where they have to have their first hearing, and that's when they're officially charged, you know, or read the crime that they are charged with. At that point, we will transport them, DJJ, to the facility that is designed for that level of offense. So we'll be addressing what Senator Schickel mentioned. But I've also seen comments that he or others want these facilities to be co-ed, and I cannot disagree more. Yes, we had to move fast, which means that the Northern Kentucky facility is all female, but listen, we cannot allow a situation where what happened in Adair County ever happens again. That was one of our most secure facilities by its actual setup, and we still had a sexual assault there. So, you know, I don't want law enforcement to have to drive 2.5 hours. But in this instance, if it meant that all of those girls are better protected for the moment, you know, that's something that I think that we can work with and address. But I still fully support creating the female-only juvenile justice center. Now, when we submit our requested bill to the legislature on this, it is going to include a request for dollars to start the design, perhaps even the construction of new facilities where needed. certainly it would be better if we had a male facility in Northern Kentucky as well. And so that's something we are very willing to consider. But there are two things we cannot do anymore. We cannot house girls and boys in the same facility, and we cannot house a truant next to someone accused of murder. And let me just talk about that for a second, because we DJJ, I think someone misspoke last night on this. We as DJJ don't determine who goes into a facility. That is a district judge. I disagree with ever sending a minor to one of these facilities for low-level misdemeanors, for truancy, or the like. But we have to take anybody that the court system sends our way. And this system was designed and was put into law by the General Assembly, which created the regional model that we're now changing. Now, I think there's widespread support out there about making the changes. So that was a long answer to a shorter question. Olivia.
Is House Bill 1 lands on your desk? Do you have plans to sign it or?
I'm still waiting to see what House Bill 1 will look like in its final form. Certainly, I vetoed a bill last session that would have raised sales tax and did raise sales tax because the veto was overridden on a huge number of services. And I think multiple of those sales tax that were added by the General Assembly are wrong. They hit small businesses that are struggling. But I cannot believe that they applied it to background checks. That's how you check someone working in a youth organization, to make sure that they should be employed there and that they don't have a history. And now it's more expensive for organizations to keep our kids safe. I also thought that the best way that we could provide relief to Kentuckians, if that's what we're talking about, was at least temporarily decreasing the sales tax, because that helps everybody. It helps everybody, and especially helps those that are really struggling, that may not make enough to pay income tax. And when things cost too much, a reduction in the sales tax makes them cost less. But as it comes to me, we'll have to look at where we are. I'll have to look at how many dollars it'll put in the pockets of how many Kentuckians at that time, and how it could help their lives. So I'm certainly keeping an open mind about it, and we'll see once it hits my desk. Bodie.
Thank you, Governor. Just to continue the conversation on House Bill 1, what do you make of this strategy that's being presented by the GOP? We just had the income tax drop by 0.5% at the start of the year. This bill they're poised to pass today, dropping it another 0.5%. There's an argument being made here that this is giving more money back to Kentuckians. Members of your own party are saying this is only going to benefit wealthy Kentuckians. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, first, there has not been a drop in the income tax yet, because the legislation that was passed in the last session talked about the factors that had to be reached, and our current economy meets those factors, but it still required them to pass another bill that'll do it. And so House Bill 1 does that, and then the year after brings it down another 0.5%. But unlike the original bill, this one I don't believe requires a separate piece of legislation for year 2 that's out there. I think people are looking at a lot of factors. I think they want Kentuckians to find some relief from inflation, to have extra dollars in their pockets, and there's an argument about fairness that's going on right now. Certainly, we would prefer an option that helps everyone, especially those that are struggling. And then I think folks are looking at long term. Right now, our fiscal house is in the best shape that it's been in decades, but that doesn't mean years down the road that will be the same. So I think that you're hearing a lot of good arguments that are out there, but we live in the world we live in. So
Last night, Osborne's divers were asked about your proposal for teachers raises, and they highlighted that you and them have not spoken about that plan, and they kind of framed the relationship as fraught in a way. I'm wondering if you think there's any chance to build a better relationship with legislative leaders, or is that just impossible in this election year? And then I have one more question. Do you think Matt Bevin is going to enter the Republican governor's race?
I have no idea if Matt Bevin's going to enter the race. Absolutely none. I guess we'll all know on Friday. Our Education First plan, we offered in the last legislative session as well. And I sat with legislative leaders in the conference room right here in this room, and we talked through each of the pieces. When they talked about how they might provide more dollars, we talked about how it absolutely needed to have a requirement, which had been done before, of the 5% teacher raise. We've talked about education, and we've talked about raises at a number of instances. We have meetings with various members of legislative leadership, especially about things they need in their district. You know, one of the funny things that you notice is you go into a legislator's district and they talk about all the things that you've done together and done for the district, but then you get to Frankfurt and you hear a different story. I don't expect anything less than a response to a state of the Commonwealth. I think the response, the way it's created, is going to create disagreement. But everything from water, sewer, ARPA spending, we negotiated right here, to broadband, which we worked directly with them on, to a number of other projects. Look in the last budget on the money going to career and technical renovations. We came to the legislative leadership and said we had all these projects that were within a half a point of getting funded. We think we should fund them and name them in the budget, and that happened too. I think even Damon Thayer said the other day that while it's not covered, most bills have bipartisan support and work between the executive and the legislative branch, and that's true. It's just not dramatic. But I think yesterday at the Brent Spence Bridge announcement ought to show you that I'm willing to work with anybody who wants to walk in the door and work in good faith. Senator McConnell and I worked together on the Brent Spence Bridge. In fact, we put out a joint press release on it, and it was good to see him there in that spirit of bipartisanship, along with Governor DeWine, who I work with on a regular basis. All right, Gil McClanahan.
Governor, I have a two-part question again on House Bill 1. I'm listening to you, and I'm getting the impression that you're not totally opposed to it, that you would keep an open mind. First of all, what would have to be in House Bill 1 in order for you to sign it? And number two, I know you mentioned sales taxes. What other sort of tax cuts would you be for to put more money back in the pockets of Kentuckians?
Well, I believe that the legislature should revisit the tax increases they passed last session. I believe those sales taxes, by and large, were wrong and are significantly impacting Kentuckians. I'm going to have to see House Bill 1 when it comes to my desk. I'm going to keep an open mind because in the end, I'm not worried about the D versus R. I'm worried about our families, and what I will use to evaluate it is, will it help a number of our Kentucky families? Marley Pinchuk from WSAZ.
Yes, it's Pinchuk. Governor, thank you so much. I spoke with a woman in Wayland impacted by flooding who says she's been denied multiple times from FEMA. She says she doesn't have insurance, so she's not sure if that plays a factor. But like so many families, she's trying to rebuild her home that flooding absolutely destroyed. Is there any advice you can give, or any other avenues maybe the state recommends in this situation?
Well, first, keep pushing. Not knowing the parts of her claim in whether she might have been in the floodplain and received FEMA funding before, that can disqualify somebody, and that's one of the reasons we're trying to move people to higher ground. But without knowing the specifics of her claim, dollars are still being paid out, and they're being paid out to people who were previously denied. But we'd be willing to connect her directly with our emergency management folks and see what we can do about that claim. There's also a lot of really great nonprofit groups that we're working with, some, and others are out there working as well, especially on home repairs and in some instances, home rebuilding. The biggest challenge, and it's hard on families that have been through this, is we can't rebuild a home that would put somebody in danger. And that land might be have been in the family for decades. But both the federal government and the state and the local government know that we can't rebuild that home when that person is going to go through this again. Now, our challenge is to make sure, whether it's through a FEMA buyout or other means, that they can get in a new home without more debt. Right? They shouldn't be in a worse situation than before this flooding. But if you want to get in contact with Crystal, we can try to follow up individually with this person. Matt Wilson, WTVQ.
Thank you, Governor. In light of the two lawsuits that were filed in McGoffin County following the crash in late 2022, and now a separate issue in Wolfe County today involving a Head Start bus, will any type of legislation be considered or discussed this year regarding school bus safety?
Well, I think we've got to learn from every accident, from every tragedy. And so getting to the bottom of the facts of that school bus accident in McGoffin, and I'm not entirely familiar with the one from this morning, we ought to be able to learn every time something like this happens. Some of that will be in the investigation from law enforcement and others, and more may come out in these lawsuits. I've not seen a bill filed yet. I certainly have worried about kids not having seatbelts on many buses when it's something that we would always put our on our kids in a car. So I hope that we will ultimately learn facts from both of these that will ensure that other kids never have to go through something like that, and that we can make our kids safer in every aspect of their lives, from transportation to when they're at school and even when they're at home. All right. Thank you all very much. It's been a slightly shorter one. We'll see you next week.